always sick. I'm always, I don't know. I can't do anything. See all of this. What do you expect me to do? Fix it? I'm only 10. I can't even do anything in this war. I just want to be a doctor or anything to help my people, but I can't. I'm just a kid.
What I witnessed in Gaza, I can only describe as a dystopian, post-apocalyptic wasteland. We, the United States, are complicit. We are involved, hand in hand, in the atrocities and the genocide that is currently undergoing in Gaza.
Listen to the words of Israel's leaders. They said, they didn't use the word genocide, but they said we're going to kill them all. They are Amalek.
The Commission concluded that Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian.
We are told that the number of children that have had one or both legs and arms amputated is greater than in any other conflict this century.
It's not just Netanyahu and Gallant. I mean, those two, there are warrants out for them from the International Court of Justice. So there are some countries that possibly would arrest them if they went to those countries, like Spain, maybe, and Ireland. But there's an entire group of Israelis that are complicit in the genocide, and I also include Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump. You know, many Americans are complicit. They have made it possible for Israel to conduct this genocide.
Now, Israel's far-right finance minister plans to approve thousands of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, saying it buries the idea of a Palestinian state. Israeli media say the move by Bezalel Smotrich could lead to more than 3,000 illegal units being built as part of the controversial E1 project. The minister is quoted as saying strong international opposition has forced the project to be frozen until now. So
Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, his two coalition partners, they're completely genocidal. And they definitely want, well, they're making it as easy as possible for the Jewish settlers to conduct their terrorism to a far greater extent than previously, to conduct their terrorism in the West Bank and rid it of Palestinians. When Ben-Gvir was notified that a Jewish settler had murdered a Palestinian teenager in cold blood, he said the settler deserves a medal. Tamir Pardo was the head of Mossad, and a few years ago he said that Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are worse, much worse than the KKK.
I'm here today outside a synagogue where they're selling properties built on land stolen from Palestinians.
The International Court of Justice ruled that the settlements are illegal, the separation wall is illegal because it doesn't follow the green line, it intrudes into Palestinian territory. The annexation of East Jerusalem is illegal, and they should dismantle the settlements. But Israel doesn't care, they keep building more settlements because God gave them the land.
Hi, Rich, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
Good, good, good. You were telling me you didn't have enough sleep last night.
Yeah, that's pretty typical at my age.
Okay, hope it gets...
5 hours a night is what I average.
Hope it gets better soon, I guess. Because good sleep is better for health.
Right.
So what's been happening in your part of the world?
Well, in the United States, people are focused on ICE, on Venezuela, Greenland, and of course, people who pay attention to what's happening with the Palestinians are aware of the ceasefire that Israel has violated hundreds of times, and it's not even a ceasefire. Anyway, it's a surrender. And the Palestinians were not even part of the ceasefire agreement. It was just kind of a proclamation from Donald Trump that was satisfactory to Netanyahu and Miriam Adelson. So, I'm very pessimistic about the prospects for the Palestinians. We saw that Israel was the first country to recognize Somaliland. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, and most of Africa, much of the world was upset about that. But as soon as I saw it, I said, oh, of course they recognize Somaliland. They want to ship the Palestinians there, which they'll have to do by force. So things are not brightening up. Not in a world where we have leaders like Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and so many others that I could name. But those are the two, for our purposes, those are the two main progenitors of evil in the world, in my opinion.
So Netanyahu was recently in United States, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
His son... Right, and his one of his sons, the really nasty one, I think it's Jair, I believe he lives in Florida now and has been for a while. And so I know Netanyahu, I read that Netanyahu went to Florida. Presumably, in my opinion, he went to see his son and maybe connect with some wealthy donors. But, he belongs in prison. The United States should respect the arrest warrant from the International Court of Justice. But of course they don't, because they're just as complicit in the genocide as is Netanyahu and his cronies. So this is a terrible situation. I don't see it getting better when you have these guys in power for a few more years, at least Trump for a few more years. Netanyahu, we'll see. But even if Netanyahu goes, who's going to replace him? Another fascist. But with people like this in power, I don't see much. I just have no optimism for the Palestinian cause. It's very unfortunate.
So Israeli,
and to me, what I want to say is, to me, the Palestinian cause, the Israel-Palestine tragedy altogether, is an archetype for suffering. And the reason I call it an archetype is because everything is so exaggerated. Victim consciousness, the nation and its people with overwhelming power see themselves as the victim. The ignorance, the willful ignorance, is astonishing. People believe stories or believe Israeli narratives that can easily be debunked. But what these people do, this happens all the time. Like maybe I'll do an interview, and then someone will dislike something I said, often a historical fact. And what they'll do is they'll Google something. They'll take 30 seconds to Google and find something they like a soundbite, and use that to try to refute everything I've said, which is a product of thousands of hours of research, a very meticulous research using Israeli sources to make sure that if I was going to say that Israel was committing crimes against humanity or war crimes, I was not going to say that it was someone from an Arab nation that was saying it, because I knew that at least Israel's supporters and many of its Israel's Jewish supporters and many of its non-Jewish supporters would say, well, it's an Arab saying that. Well, of course, they're predisposed to try to refute anything Israel does. They're bigoted against Israel. So what I did was I used the most impeccable sources I could use: David Ben-Gurion, Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Rabin, Israeli State Archives, the Central Zionist Archives, the Book of the Haganah. But even that is not enough for these people. When I say these people, I mean people who refuse to look at the history, yet think they know everything there is to know. And I've met many people like this. The more you know, the more ignorant you're perceived to be. When I say the more you know, I mean the more actual documented history that you're aware of, that is irrefutable. And the more of that you are knowledgeable about, the more ignorant you're perceived to be. And the more ignorant you are, the more knowledgeable you're perceived to be. Everything is upside down in this issue. I think you're laughing. So, but anyway, that's the gist of it to start.
yeah, but because America doesn't really recognize ICJ or ICC, so there's no way America can hold Netanyahu or Isaac Herzog accountable. Isaac Herzog is proposing to come to Australia in February, but I've seen a lot of demonstrations against that. In fact, a lot of Jews are demonstrating against that as well. Not that it matters if it's a Jew or non-Jew, but yeah, a lot of people are demonstrating against his visit to Australia. Let's see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, it's not just Netanyahu and Gallant. I mean, those two, there are warrants out for them from the International Court of Justice. So there are some countries that possibly would arrest them if they went to those countries, like Spain, maybe, and Ireland. But there's an entire group of Israelis that are complicit in the genocide, and I also include Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump. Many Americans are complicit. They have made it possible for Israel to conduct this genocide. Israel could not have been doing it for more than 2 years without the aid and assistance, and I should say almost gleeful assistance of the United States and its really ignorant congressional supporters. When you see Lindsey Graham, who has a history of warmongering, when you see Lindsey Graham cozying up to Benjamin Netanyahu and acting like they're great pals, how is this any different than, I don't know, than some diplomat getting friendly with Adolf Hitler or Joseph Goebbels in the 1930s? I don't see much difference, because these are people who are willfully committing genocide against the Palestinian people. If you didn't believe it in the first 2 years before the Trump so-called ceasefire took place, well, now you how can you not believe it? Because Israel is starving people, preventing aid from coming in, preventing medical aid. This is all willful. They wouldn't do that if their intention was not to harm the Palestinians. And children are freezing to death now because Israel does not allow in, winter, material, clothes and habitats and things like that. I mean, it's just outrageous. But when you really get down to it, all you have to do is listen to the words of Israel's leaders. They said, they didn't use the word genocide, but they said we're going to kill them all. They are Amalek. Amalek, of course, is the figure in the Old Testament that God tells Saul, in particular, in I think the book of Samuel 1, that that Saul must destroy every living Amalekite, man, woman, child, infant, their sheep, their cattle. And to continue the story just for a bit, Saul kills everybody, but he does not kill the king. And the king eventually marries and has children, and 250 years later, Haman in Persia, who is a descendant of the Amalekite king, plots to kill all the Jews of Persia, and then that becomes the book of Esther, which is in the Old Testament. So this goes back, this consciousness of this victim consciousness, and I'm not saying the Jews were not treated horribly for much of their existence, but this consciousness, this victim consciousness, goes back thousands of years. And what happens is when someone or a group, a collective, embody a particular consciousness, a particular identity, such as a victim identity, they are going to interpret things that happen in the world as attempting to victimize them. So, for example, you're in Australia, the killing of, I think, 15 Jews in Bondi Beach. Okay, now I've read articles, I've read letters to the editor in my hometown from rabbis and other prominent Jewish people in the community mourning the deaths of the Jews in Bondi Beach, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But they haven't said anything about the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza in particular, and also in the West Bank. They haven't said anything about Israel's policies and the killing, the IDF and other entities, the settlers, killing Palestinians. And it's because they support what Israel is doing. That's why. And so what's interesting is if someone told them, oh, did you just hear about this Jewish person who was just killed? And the Jewish person was actually a Muslim. Okay, but they would still have the same empathy for that Jewish person that was just killed, only because they were told that person was a Jew. The minute they're told that person was a Muslim, it doesn't matter. The killing is fine. The killing of 20,000 children is fine because they're not Jewish. It's nothing like the killing of a single Jew. And I know that because that's the way I was at one time. And I have seen for 20 years now, since I awoke from my stupor of ignorance, I have seen amongst my Jewish relatives, amongst Jewish friends, amongst the Jewish community, that same kind of thinking, that same consciousness that lacks compassion for the so-called other, that actually supports the destruction, the humiliation of the so-called other. And it's a problem that is not just confined to Israel-Palestine. This kind of consciousness is going to destroy the world. We see it in the United States with the assault amongst Republicans against wokeness. oh my God, that person cares about the black people in South Carolina who are suffering. Oh, well, they're just woke. We have to get rid of woke people. And we have to stop teaching things in our schools that make white people feel bad about themselves because they enslaved black people for a couple hundred years. This consciousness is self-destructive, and it's self and other destructive. And again, so it's not just confined to Israel, Palestine, but in Israel, Palestine, everything is exaggerated, which is why I call it an archetype.
It's not just that; it's also suppression of freedom of expression. Because I was talking to Dr. Maura Finkelstein. I think you might know of her case. Probably she was the first tenured U.S. professor. Her tenure was revoked because she was pro-Palestine. So
right,
there have been many. Yeah, there have been many cases where Rashid Khalidi also, I think he quit his job as well. He's written some fabulous books and articles.
Yeah.
There are many other professors. David Miller from UK, he had to quit because he was pro-Palestinian. And also I've been hearing that there's sort of a ban on Palestinian studies in some universities. In Australia also, and in America also. So they don't want you to go back to history and find out what really happened, I guess.
Correct. That is right. And that is why Benjamin Netanyahu shut down the Israeli State Archives a few years ago. He shut them down for 75 years. Now, a lot of the material is already out there through Israeli historians Ilan Pape, Avi Shleim, Simha Flappin, Benny Morris, Tom Segev. But still, there's a lot of information that Netanyahu doesn't want people to see. And in the United States, yes, it's the same thing. They're trying to, many states, many school districts are trying to, actually much of the South, the Republicans have banned books. They're trying to prevent awareness of the Palestinian cause. And now Israel is spending tens of millions of dollars promoting their narrative. You know, they're promoting Hasbara. And by the way, Ali, when I give a public talk, there's always someone in the audience who I would call a Zionist. Usually if they talk, they call themselves a Zionist. And they're not there to learn anything. They're not curious about anything I might say, even though I was once like them. You would think they'd be curious. Well, what happened to this guy? You know, he had the same views as me. He came from a Jewish background like I do. So what happened to this guy? What has changed? And they're not interested. If I discuss a historical incident and give it the attention that it deserves and clarify it, such as, for example, the 1947 UN partition plan, which I can explain in a minute if you want. But there's a soundbite out there, and this is one of the main soundbites that, well, the Jews accepted the 1947 UN partition plan, and the Palestinians rejected it. So there. So everything that follows is the Palestinians' fault. But what they do, it's just a soundbite. They don't dig any deeper than that. And if they dug deeper, they'd know that the Jewish agency, led by David Ben-Gurion, totally rejected partition. The only reason they voted for it was because it was a stepping stone to, as David Ben-Gurion said, quote, expand into the whole of Palestine. Not only that, the Jewish agency rejected an Arab peace plan that would have created a single country with equal rights for all citizens. Moreover, what people who use this ridiculous partition plan argument don't know and don't want to know is that under the partition plan, the Jewish state would have been 50.1% Jewish and 49.9% Palestinian, and the Palestinians have a higher birth rate than the Jews, so they would eventually have become the majority. Not only that, why would Israel be happy with 56% of Palestine, which is what the partition plan gave them, when they've never been happy with the 78% they've controlled since 1949? And so people never think about this, you know, because it doesn't fit the narrative they want to believe. People don't even see Israel. Part of the narrative involves them being blind to Israel. They do not see Israel. They have never seen Israel. What they are seeing are projections, idealized projections from their mind that they project onto the Israel that they don't want to see. So they see an Israel that reflects what they believe is true of themselves, a fair and humane nation. But what they don't know is, because they've never inquired into themselves, is that they're supporting unfairness and inhumanity. Therefore, they're not particularly fair and humane. And they dismiss all of the, not just the Christians, but all the pleas of the Palestinian people for civil rights, to be treated like human beings, to not being subject to genocide and settler violence and terrorism every day of their lives. This is what these people reject. In the name of goodness, in the name of justice. This is the dualistic mind that projects its suffering onto the other and then blames the other for its own suffering.
So why was there one nation created, one state created? Why wasn't there a one state created at that point? Because let's say, if I give an example, America is also a settler colonial state. They had to kill a lot of natives. Australia did the same. They killed a lot of natives. South Africa is another one. But all these three countries, and New Zealand also, I think Canada as well, but these are one countries. So one state in which natives also now have equal rights. Australia didn't give them equal rights in the beginning, but eventually Australia said, yeah, every human being has equal rights. Why wasn't there one state created in 1948 then? Why Israel was created as a separate state, and Palestinians, the natives, Semite people, didn't get anything?
Okay, well, first of all, probably the principal doctrine of Zionism is that where Jews go, anti-Semitism erupts. Therefore, Jews must have their own state. And David Ben-Gurion always believed that a Jewish state should be at least 80% populated by Jews. So they couldn't have a single state, because that would be more Palestinians than Jews, and therefore it couldn't be a Jewish state. That's number one. Number two, even before 1948 or 1947 with the UN Partition Plan, for years before that, the Jewish Agency had set up what they called population transfer committees, where they were finding ways where they could transfer the population of Palestine. David Ben-Gurion said, I support compulsory transfer. I don't see anything immoral in that. And that's what they wanted to do. In fact, of course, there's a famous quote by Theodore Herzl, and Herzl died in the early 1900s. He said, we must spirit the penniless from the land. In 1907, and I think Herzl died by then, but David Ben-Gurion, as early as 1907, proposed that the Jews, once they have enough power in Palestine, starve the Palestinians so they'll move elsewhere, so they'll leave and go to another Arab country. So it's always been the intention of the Zionist movement to have a Jewish state as Jewish as possible by population. Okay? And it's even more true now, as I'm sure you know, after Hamas's attack on October 7th. They're fed up. The Israelis are fed up. God damn it. How come the Palestinians refuse to buckle under our yoke? Why don't the Palestinians just give up and accept the fact that they're second-class citizens? Damn it, we got to kill them. And frankly, I believe that Benjamin Netanyahu's lifetime dream has not only been his lifetime dream has been to be the modern-day Moses or the Moshiach, and that includes the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and in Netanyahu's case, that would include murder. He's perfectly fine with killing Palestinians. He has used the term Amalek for many years now. That is code, at least to the religious Jewish community, that he wants them all exterminated. And certainly Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, his two coalition partners, they're completely genocidal. And they definitely want Well, they're making it as easy as possible for the Jewish settlers to conduct their terrorism to a far greater extent than previously, to conduct their terrorism in the West Bank and rid it of Palestinians. When Ben-Gvir was notified that a Jewish settler had murdered a Palestinian teenager in cold blood, he said the settler deserves a medal. There was that recent case, I can't remember the man's name, Hathaline, a Palestinian man who was very loved, not by the community, but a lot of Jews who knew him liked him a lot. He was murdered in cold blood by a Jewish settler who had been on Joe Biden's sanction list. Joe Biden, the genocidal president, who was not as bad as Donald Trump. Trump lifted the sanctions. And I'm not exactly sure what that means, but in any case, this settler murdered a Palestinian man in cold blood on camera in front of 16 Palestinian witnesses. And what did they do? They let the Jewish settler go. They did not arrest him, but they arrested the 16 Palestinian settlers. I imagine they probably tortured some or all of them, as they often do. So this is the kind of racist mentality, rather vicious racist mentality we're talking about. And when I say racist mentality, I just want to mention one thing. Tamir Pardo was the head of Mossad. And a few years ago, he said that Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are worse, much worse than the KKK. So this is the kind of consciousness we're talking about. We're talking about a genocidal consciousness that is being acted out in real time, right now.
I want to share something with you, and I want to get your opinion on that. Let me know when you see the screen.
The masters of the universe are Jews.
A majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel. And my friends, I think the reason for that is that we're losing the digital war. Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and whatever it is, and we're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. You know, we've got Altman and AI, we got Zuckerberg, we got Sergey Brin, we got the whole group across the board. Jan Combs, founded WhatsApp. It's us, and we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle. Amelia, we got to get our digital sneakers on so that the truth can prevail over the lies. And when we do that, the future of Israel will be stronger because a majority of all Americans will support Israel. We'll make that happen. We have to make it happen. Thank you. Baruch Hashem. Thanks.
He's an ignorant megalomaniac.
Did you get the audio?
First of all,
yeah.
What's that? Yeah, I could hear him.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not because of. Yeah, well, yes, people are getting information on TikTok, but they could get the same information on other venues. It's the information, not the platform, that is the reason they're losing Gen Z, because the information is so damning of Israel. The information reveals Israel's inhumane, genocidal policies. But Norm Coleman and his cronies, they, as I say, they don't know the history because they don't want to know the history. What they think they know is the Israeli narrative, hasbara, propaganda. All they can do is continually repeat what they've been taught since they were children, probably. Okay, which is Israel was an innocent nation only wanting to live in peace with its neighbors, and its neighbors, all a bunch of bloodthirsty Arabs, want to kill them and push them into the sea. That's the narrative they live with. They don't have the decency to question the possibility that they might be wrong. They can't even admit that they haven't studied the issue. As I've said before, I think I've said this to you before, and I alluded to it earlier. When I was a kid growing up Jewish in New Jersey, in a fairly large community with a lot of Jews, knowledge was considered highly commendable, and ignorance was frowned upon. But when it comes to Israel nowadays, the more knowledgeable you are, the more ignorant you're judged to be. And the more ignorant you are and inhumane, the more knowledgeable you're judged to be. This is the dualistic mind that projects its suffering onto the other. What's that?
But even So Benny Morris, he's written extensively. In recent times, it's obviously Avi Shalim was he lives in UK now, but he's not an Israeli anymore. Ilan Pape, like you mentioned, they have written extensively. Gideon Levy, they have written extensively. But even if you go by Benny Morris, who leans towards Israel quite a bit, I mean, he's written about the ethnic cleansing and mass massacres when Israel was created. So these people haven't even read their own books, their own history books.
Well, Benny Morris. See, Benny Morris is not in denial. Benny Morris is perfectly okay saying Israel ethnically cleansed 700,000 Palestinians, but they should have ethnically cleansed more. That's where Benny Morris is coming. Benny Morris believes that Israel should drop a nuclear weapon on Iran. Okay, but no. But I'll give you an example of this form of denial that is so prevalent within the Jewish community that thinks it knows everything. Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz wrote a book called The Case for Israel. Now, that was probably the dumbest title he could have selected because he's an attorney and he's Israel's attorney. And everybody knows that an attorney wants to make the case for their client. And that case that the attorney wants to make may include blocking evidence that shows the guilt of the client. So what Dershowitz did in his book, his main source in that book, in The Case for Israel, is Benny Morris, whom I believe he quotes 87 times in the 200 and some pages of The Case for Israel. And of those 80 some times, I believe 57 or 59 of those quotes come from Benny Morris's book, Righteous Victims. And in Benny Morris's book, Righteous Victims, Morris details, I believe it's 22 massacres by Jewish forces against Palestinian villages. Yet Dershowitz says that Israel has never, Dershowitz denies that the Irgun, the Haganah, the Stern Gang ever did anything unwarranted to these villages. I've heard Dershowitz say, this is a guy who claims he studied this issue voluminously. I saw him tell Cornel West in the early months of this latest genocide that Israel has never targeted innocent civilians. And Cornel West said, what? Israel has never targeted innocent civilians? And Dershowitz goes, no, not once in its history has Israel ever targeted innocent civilians. Well, the books Dershowitz has read, Benny Morris in particular, talk about how David Ben-Gurion and Yigal Allon was the most prominent general of the 1948 war, talked about how if you just kill a family, it's no big deal, but you destroy a whole neighborhood, now you're making an impression. And they explicitly said you have to kill men, women, and children. And so did Moshe Dayan. And when you go through the list, they were all targeting. When you look at the statements of some of the most right-wing chiefs of staff, you know that Israel always targeted innocent civilians. In fact, there's a famous quote by Mordecai Ger, who was a chief of staff, one of the Israeli chiefs of staffs, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, something like that. And he was quoted by Zeev Schiff, who's probably the most revered military analyst by all sides from all portions of the political spectrum. And he said, Israel has always consciously and premeditatedly targeted civilians. It is never something. It goes something like, it has never not targeted civilians. And here's Alan Dershowitz, this so-called expert, lying through his teeth and getting his followers, and he has a lot of followers, and his book is studied, I believe, in synagogues, getting people to believe that Israel has always acted humanely and innocently. He doesn't care about the truth. He only cares about defending his own identity. Really, when you come down to it, he doesn't care about Israel either. He only cares about himself. He's too narcissistic. He collectively, that community are too narcissistic to care about Israel. They want to protect their self-imagery. I'm decent and humane there, and I support Israel. Therefore, Israel must be decent and humane, because I would never support a country committing genocide. So Israel is not committing genocide. Oh, I know what the International Court of Justice says, and South Africa, and the legal briefs they've compiled, but I know more than any of them. I haven't studied anything, and I haven't read anything that they've written, but I know more than all of them. That's the internal conversation that's going on.
But Irgun was declared a terrorist organization when they attacked King David Hotel back in the day by Britain. So obviously there's precedence over there that there was terrorist activity carried out. And
well, you know what?
Yeah.
The Irgun, there's strong evidence to suggest that the Irgun killed more Jews than any other group of people. They killed Jews who called for peace with the Arabs. They killed Jews who did business with Arabs. They killed Jews who were friends with Arabs. And they were extreme. This is the organization led by Menachem Begin, who I consider a saint compared to Benjamin Netanyahu. But this is Menachem Begin, who became Israel's future prime minister. Yitzhak Shamir, who was the head of the Stern Gang, and Shamir succeeded Begin as prime minister. Shamir was guilty of killing Count Folk Bernadotte, I believe, and Lord Lemoyne, who was one of the British diplomats. And Shamir was wanted by Interpol for a time. Okay, and the Stern Gang was probably more radical than the Irgun, because the Irgun, when they realized what the Nazis were doing in Europe, they said, let's suspend our activities against the British in Palestine and focus on the Nazis. But the Stern Gang did not do that. The Stern Gang broke off. A segment of the Irgun broke off from the Irgun and started the Stern Gang. And the Stern Gang members of the Stern Gang went to Nazi officials and said, I'm paraphrasing, but they said, look, you believe in Aryan superiority, we believe in Jewish superiority. So why don't you send the Jews of Germany to us? You'll get rid of them, so you'll increase your Aryan population, the proportion of Aryans in your state, and then we'll have the Jews that we want, so we can build a Jewish supremacist state. Germany didn't comply with its wishes, although I wish they had. But that was kind of the thinking behind the Stern Gang.
Yeah, Avi Shalim, in his book Memoirs of a Jew, Arab Jew, he also says the same thing, that Arab Jews were targeted because they wanted peace and they didn't want to go to Israel. So Israel had to do terrorism activities to make them unsafe in Arab land, and then make them
Baghdad
move, because
and Alexandria.
Because Israel needed legitimacy at that point. I think Norman Finkelstein says the same thing, what you are trying to say as well, that Israel at that point needed legitimacy, so it carried out some activities, terrorist activities against Jews, so they can move to Israel, so they can show the world, okay, many Jews are living in Israel now. But so that was when Israel was created. So it was created, like you're saying, as an ethno-state, I guess. So they didn't want any non-Jews in there. But now in
it was 80% was Ben Gurion's figure, 80% Jewish.
So now in 2026, so we've gone through Australian apartheid, we've gone through South African apartheid as well. Now in 2026, we've still got apartheid in Israel. I mean, why do you think the international community is still siding with Israel? Not the public. The public overwhelmingly supports, Palestinian rights to freedom. But the government officials of all these so-called free countries, why are they supporting Israel and still sending weapons? Do you have any idea why they still do that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think some of the leaders of these countries are as ignorant as the leaders of the United States and actually believe that Israel is a nation besieged by anti-Semites. Part of it may be they feel threatened. They feel they have to do that to maintain the relations with the United States and some other countries. it does boggle the mind. Even the Arab countries have pretty much abandoned the Palestinian cause, you know. And of course, Israel has worked on this for decades. Israel through AIPAC in the United States, and of course, the United States pretending to be a neutral broker for decades was anything but. And I mean, I recently heard Bill and Hillary Clinton talk about. They're talking about that. Well, Bill said how when he was president during Camp David, the Palestinians rejected a generous offer from Israel. Even Clinton believes the Hasbara. I mean, if you listen to his negotiators who were part of the American negotiators who were at Camp David, you know, people like Gamal Halal, Ned Walker, Aaron David Miller, and Robert Malley, and then also Shlomo Ben-Ami, the head of the Israeli negotiating team. Daniel Levy was on the Israeli negotiating team. If you listen to these guys, you know that what Israel offered, to quote Shlomo Ben-Ami, Israel's chief negotiator, fell far short of even modest Palestinian expectations. A few years after Shlomo Ben-Ami said that, he said publicly on TV, if I were a Palestinian, I would have rejected Camp David as well. Okay, so, I mean, and yet Bill Clinton, now, of course, when Clinton came into office, he said, I want to be the greatest president Israel ever had. And he was very friendly. He loved Yitzhak Rabin. He got paid probably when towards the end of Obama's presidency, maybe it was George W., but Clinton gave a 45-minute speech at the Shimon Peres Center in Israel. And for that 45-minute speech, he was paid $500,000. Hillary Clinton, her chief donors, when she ran for president, were dual citizens of Israel and the United States, Jewish billionaires. So they are bought off. You know, I mean, they are, at the very least, they're inclined to take the Israeli position and inclined to not notice the Palestinian position, or to just consider criticism of the Israeli position to be more anti-Semitism or ignorant statements from people who just hate Israel, rather than doing any real investigation, which they have not done, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we always used to laugh at this suggestion of anti-Semitism, because I'm not sure whether you know the history of Indian independence. We've had one of the biggest genocides and mass massacres. More than 160 million of us were killed. You know what they used to do? In 1871, when there was a revolt against British rulers, they would go to villages, they would bring men in, they would tie them to the cannons in lines, they will bring all the villages and make them watch as they blow our men via cannon. They would make everybody watch, so no one could resist or no one could revolt. We lost a lot of people. There was systemic genocidal policies that would take food and grain away from villages. So people just kept dying and dying and dying. So we know that mentality, you know.
Right.
But yeah, so fighting for your right to exist. Yeah, I always used to laugh when people would say that this is anti-Semitism, because we have a very different definition. I think I mentioned that last time as well. We go back to the root, because Semitic is, according to, you know, scientific study, is a linguistic and ethnocultural term used for people who used to live in the Semite region, which is Israel, Palestine, Jordan, parts of Syria, parts of Saudi Arabia.
Right.
All that kind of stuff. So when I talk to my Palestinian friends, they say, oh, they are obviously Semites. So the genocide is the biggest anti-Semite activity going on right now. So they always flip it around, and rightly so. And you can't really argue against that as well. Because, I mean, yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah.
Israel and its supporters have expropriated language. So now anti-Semitism, look, they should just call it Jew hatred. But Jew hatred sounds a little inelegant.
Yeah, but
so
we
they
know,
use the term
but we know how weaponizing language works, because Britishers did the same thing. I mean, most settler colonialists do the same thing. They weaponize language, because in 1871 there was a law in India called criminal tribes law, more than 130 villages, not villagers, villages and tribes were declared criminal tribes. So anybody born in those villages and tribes by birth would be a criminal. So they would have to report to British police for their movement. They would be given a ration of food. They would have to, there will be restriction on their movements as well. And the language is weaponized in a way that they were not called Indians. So obviously they were Indians, they're born in India. So that's how you justify someone not being an Indian or not being a native. You just hijack the language and the culture, stuff like that. It's like in Australia, Japan invading Australia. And then when Australians try to fight back, Japanese would say, "You're fighting against Australians. We are Australians. Don't fight against Australians." Something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So I know how that feels, weaponizing language. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the history of humanity is filled with horrible, horrible examples of inhumanity.
Yeah.
You know?
That's true.
And it's this consciousness, it's this us against them consciousness. It's the fear of the other, often irrational. Often irrational, but the other represents something outside of the boundaries or the framework of how you define yourself. Therefore, the other is a potential threat. And if the other becomes a threat in the eyes of the viewer, then the other must be exterminated or at the very least subjugated.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question about settlements. And I've heard that in New York City synagogues, they sell land that belongs to Palestinians. Is that right?
Yeah, in some. Yes, I've heard that. Not just in New York City. In fact, a friend of mine who lives in Teaneck, New Jersey, organized a demonstration against the sale, I believe it was against the sale of West Bank land that was going to take place, I believe, at a synagogue in his area. I don't know if it was Teaneck or Patterson, but one of the cities in northern New Jersey.
Because I've seen videos. Yeah, I've seen videos, Israelis, civilian and Israeli army demolishing homes with Palestinians inside. Yeah. So they just take the land away from Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza and then just sell it in America.
Well, yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but yes, they take land away from Palestinians. And as far as demolition, when Israel designates a home, a Palestinian house, to be demolished, they charge the cost of the demolition to the Palestinian family. So that's why a lot of Palestinians will end up demolishing their own home themselves because it's less expensive. Okay? But just to give you an example, from 1967 till before October 7th, 2023, Israel demolished approximately 50,000 Palestinian homes, but not a single Jewish home. I guess Jews don't commit crimes, or if Palestinians commit crimes, the sentence is far worse than if the same crime were being committed by a Jew. But 50,000 homes. I was in northern Israel in the Galilee, and I met this couple, a Palestinian man and his Norwegian wife. He had spent some time in Norway and married a woman there, and he was from the northern Galilee. And when his father died, his father bequeathed parcels of land that he owned to his children. And so this man had a nice parcel of land on which he built a very nice house. And then he got a letter from the Israeli authorities saying that his house was slated for demolition because a foot of his property was on land that the architects or draftsmen has designated as part of a new Jewish-only settlement. So the settlement bled into his property by a foot. Now, of course, the idea that the draftsman would correct his error, or at least make this large settlement 1 foot in distance shorter, didn't occur to him. So because 1 foot of land, bare land, was going to be part of a Jewish settlement, that meant that this Palestinian family had demolished their own home. I don't know what eventually happened. I do know that the citizens of the city, of the town, came out and blocked the bulldozers the first time Israel tried to come and demolish it. And I don't know what happened after that. But Israel is conducting a reign of terror on the West Bank.
So that's illegal according to United Nations. You know, that's, I mean, I was reading United Nations reports. So these settlements are illegal on Palestinian land. But Israelis are still doing it, and they're selling it in America.
Oh, God, yes. Bezalel Smotrich recently said that Jews don't have to comply with international law because they're chosen. But Israel has always been contemptuous of international law. When it joined the United Nations in 1949, it promised to comply with all UN resolutions past, present, and future, which it has not. In fact, it doesn't comply with anything it doesn't want to comply with. All right? And the International Court of Justice ruled that the settlements are illegal, the separation wall is illegal because it doesn't follow the green line, it intrudes into Palestinian territory. The annexation of East Jerusalem is illegal, and they should dismantle the settlements, theoretically. But Israel doesn't care. They keep building more settlements because God gave them the land. Even Netanyahu, who's not religious, goes along with that because it fits his goals. Smotrich and Bezalel and Ben-Gvir, of course, are devotees of the book of Joshua, in which God tells the Jews to smite the enemy. And I've heard Bezalel Smotrich say that within the next 80 years, Israel will take over Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, Syria. I said Lebanon, Jordan. Yeah, those countries. And I think he might have mentioned a southern part of Turkey, because that's what God says. It says from the river to the sea, which is in the Torah. From the river to the sea, God promises that land. Well, the river is the Euphrates, and the sea is the Mediterranean. And so Smotrich considers those countries I named as being given to the Jewish people by God.
So that's all religious fundamentalism. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So they
believe, it's not just theocratic.
Yeah.
It's not just theocratic, it's also ideological. So the theocrats in Israel believe the Torah, and that gives them the right to the land. And the ideologues are Jewish supremacists in a non-religious, in a non-theocratic sense, and they believe that they should take the land, and maybe they'll use the excuse, we need it for security. Because the Palestinians are all terrorists, so they shouldn't be able to, we should not allow them to live there, because they're all terrorists. It's all a projection, Ali. They're always describing themselves and projecting their description of themselves onto the other, onto the Palestinian people. Okay? And not only that, when they commit the same crimes that they accuse Palestinians of committing, it's okay because they're just defending themselves. That's the meme they use. We're only defending ourselves. But when the Palestinians react and resist, and because of the pressure that's been applied to them for decades, and the horrible things that so many Palestinian families have gone through, when a tiny percentage reacts with violence, they're terrorists. While the Jews who are terrorizing Palestinians every day, including pouring gasoline down the throats of teenagers and setting them on fire, incinerating homes with little infants inside, that's never considered terrorism. Okay, that's an aberration. Okay, so that's an aberration. And if it's bad enough, maybe Israel will put one person on trial. I'll give you an example. When I was in the West Bank in 2010, I met a man who was a village leader of Nilin. There's Bilin and there's Nilin. And in both villages, Israel was taking their land for settlements. And up till 2010, Israel had stolen 85% of Nilin's land over the years, up until 2010. And they stole the land of a farmer who I met, very nice man, who was educated. And because they stole his land, he couldn't make a living from farming. So he started teaching. So he taught in the school, in the public school, and he was teaching 5th grade. And anyway, so what happened? I forget why I'm even telling you. So he had a student in his class whose name was Ahmad Musa, a 10-year-old boy. And Ahmad Musa one day came into class with a drawing, with a painting he had done. It was a painting of the Israeli and the Palestinian flag side by side. And the teacher said, "Why don't you explain the meaning of this painting to the class?" So Ahmed said, "Why can't we all live together in peace?" And the class stood up and cheered. Shortly thereafter, during one of the weekly demonstrations that Nilin as well as Bilin held to protest Israel's seizure of its land, this little boy, Ahmed Musa, was playing with his camera by himself in a tree area section, minding his own business, and a Israeli border policeman shot him in the head and killed him. At his funeral the next day, a border policeman shot a couple of the people shot at least one person and killed who was helping carry the casket. Anyway, the guy who shot Ahmed Musa was the only case that B'Tselem looked at out of about 35 where he was brought to some kind of legal proceeding. And the eventuality of it was that the murderer of this little boy, the cold-blooded murderer of this little boy, was given 1 week, his sentence was 1 week house detention. And I think he had to turn over his weapons. And that was it. A Palestinian can get 20 years for killing a dog, an attack dog. Okay, so this is the disparity, the ridiculous disparity, the prejudicial disparity that exists between how Israel, judges its own people versus, Palestinian people.
So all these, because Israel is not allowing any journalists to go to Palestine now. I think it's killed around more than 300 journalists, and most of the journalists.
It's killed,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but
I think it's killed more journalists in the last 2+ years than have been killed in total combined from in all conflicts beginning with the Civil War on.
Yeah,
the
but
US Civil War.
If you look at Russia and Ukraine war, so Russia is still allowing journalists, Ukraine is still allowing journalists. So it's Israel
Right.
who isn't allowing journalists on the pretext that they may get shot in the war. But so who's documenting all this then? I mean, so this case that you just mentioned of the 10-year-old boy, was that covered by United Nations, or how did you get to know about that?
I don't know. I think it was covered a little bit by B'Tselem, and I can't B'Tselem is the Israeli Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. It's an Israeli organization. I don't know who else is covering it, and I can't remember where I read about it. But, when I read about it, it was because I was confirming what this teacher told me, who I believed, and who has a very good reputation. Okay, but I just wanted to document what he had told me. And so I did a little research on it, and I found, B'Tselem was involved a little bit, and then I can't remember the other sources.
Right. So they're not allowing any journalists to go in. They keep denying it's a genocide. There are arrest warrants for its prime minister and president. Most of the influential world leaders are siding with the Israeli government's policies without doing anything. No one's going to help Palestinian, because when you look back, South African resistance, African National Congress, it was also considered a terrorist organization. Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Margaret Thatcher called him a terrorist. American government called him a terrorist. I think Obama was the one who said no, he wasn't a terrorist when Obama came to power in 2008. But so they have resisted in one form or another, and United Nations recognize suppressed people's right to resistance as well. But no one is helping Palestinians. Right. How do they get out of this mess?
I don't see a way out. I mean, from Israel's point of view, they would like to pretty much kill them all, or at least ethnically cleanse them all and get them out of that neighborhood. That's, they've been negotiating with Somaliland, apparently, Sudan, I believe Uganda and Rwanda. They want to put them. I mean, can you imagine taking these people and putting them in Sudan? I mean, it's outrageous. By the way, I want to point out that, yes, the African National Congress, the National Liberation Front of Algeria, who fought the French for 100 years, the Mau Maus of Kenya, the Irish Republican Army, yes, they were all considered terrorist organizations. They were resistance organizations that used terror tactics, and Hamas. And their purpose was to expel a foreign invader from their land. They were the indigenous people whose goal was to expel the foreign invader. The Irgun, Stern Gang, and Haganah were terrorist organizations, but they were the foreign invader whose goal was to expel the indigenous people.
Yeah.
So they have less credibility than any of those, in my opinion, than any of those terrorist organizations. Yeah. And Likud is the ancestor of the Irgun.
Yeah.
I mean, and not just formally. I mean, the Likud party, the Irgun, I believe it was Hirut, and then it became Likud, but it was all Menachem Begin and the Irgun, and and so they are the inheritor, and they are the architect to fulfill the dreams of the Jewish terrorist gangs, which is what they're doing.
Yeah. I was talking to Helena Koban. She's a journalist. You might know of her. She's a British-American journalist. I think she lives in America now.
Yes.
She was an on-ground reporter for Middle East, I think, when she was in her 20s, and she did reporting for a long time. She talked to Hamas leaders, and she published a book as well. So, and then she was telling how her friends in Palestine were killed. A professor was killed, teacher were killed in this recent war, targeted basically because they didn't want people teaching in Palestinian land. So she was recounting that Hamas is a resistance organization, and like any organization, it has a political wing and it has a military wing. So she was also talking about the same
and
thing.
They're moderates as well as fundamentalists.
Yeah, exactly. She was also talking about the same thing, like you were saying, that they used. So they started. She told me that Hamas started using these tactics when they saw IDF bombing their land in 1970s and 60s and 80s without any repercussion. So then they started putting bombs on buses or stuff like that. So that's how it started, I guess. But the intent is the same, to get foreign invaders out of your land. I think America did the same, didn't it? America fought British. And so Britishers, when you look at the documents from the British side, Americans were known as rebels and anarchists, I guess. And when you look at the documents from American side, they were freedom fighters or something like that. So,
when you look at Winston Churchill from the American and British side, he was a great hero. When you look at Winston Churchill from the perspective of India, he was a monster.
Oh, he was much worse. Yeah, much worse than a monster. Yeah. Yeah, go.
But I want to mention something about Hamas. Hamas has made more than a dozen offers for peace or long-term hudnas, ceasefires, since 1988. Israel has ignored every one of them. Jimmy Carter acknowledged that they were legitimate. The New York Times acknowledged they were legitimate. The Strategic Studies Institute at the U.S. Army War College acknowledged they were legitimate, and so did former Mossad chief Yuval Diskin and former Mossad chief and national security advisor Ephraim Halevi, and many other people. And Israel has ignored all of it. And so I hear this all the time, Ali, from mostly Jewish supporters of Israel. They want to kill us all. The Arab countries, if they could do it, they would kill all the Jews in Israel. And when I say, well, then why don't you encourage Israel to make peace? They completely ignore that. They think that making peace is the way for Israel to be exterminated by the new generation of Nazis in the form of Arab bodies, rather than it ending the genocide that Israel itself is conducting and ending the death of Jews. I don't know how many Jewish people have been killed since October 7th. I think it's in the thousands, and then there's many that have committed suicide. There's many that are now mentally ill. But Israel is always willing to sacrifice its own people for more land, or to control the people and ethnically cleanse them. But the fact is that Israel, that not only has Hamas made these offers, but like, for example, when Sheikh Yassin, Hamas's leader, when he made an offer of peace, Israel assassinated him. They bombed him. He was replaced by Sheikh Rantisi, who made a similar offer like 2 months later, and Israel assassinated him. Israel loves to assassinate people, okay? And then also, the Arab Peace Initiative has been on the table since 2002. And that peace initiative calls for the border to be the Green Line, the 1967 border. And it grants total, full diplomatic relations between all Muslim nations in the world. There's 57 of them. And Israel. That includes Yemen, Iran, okay, and Syria, Lebanon. It includes every Muslim nation would now have full diplomatic relations with Israel. There would be security guarantees for all the states in the region, and there would be peace. And I believe it gives Israel a veto over the right of return. But Israel doesn't want it because it wants the land. It is more than happy. It is more than willing to sacrifice its own citizens in order to sacrifice its own citizens and kill tens of thousands of Arabs just so that it doesn't have to make peace because it wants the land. That is the reality. That is the fact. And you can't tell that to any of Israel's supporters because they believe their own little story that they tell themselves. And they think that they're the greatest experts in the world, you know, as I alluded to earlier.
Yeah, but I mean, if you talk to people, not the government officials, many people see what is happening. So, I mean, there's no hiding
when they
now,
support
basically.
Israel,
There is no hiding. Also, so Karim Khan, who brought the case against Netanyahu, and then Francesca Albanese, United Nations rapporteur, they've both been sanctioned by United States under executive order, and no one's trying to help them financially. So I'm guessing that's where I see there is no desire from any government, from any country's government, to bring an end to all this. That's what I see.
No, unless the United States has to do it. The United States has to stop vetoing resolutions in the United Nations Security Council, and the United Nations has to stop giving Israel the weapons and the money to do what they are doing. It depends on the United States. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening at all. I don't foresee a time in the relatively near future where the United States is going to come to its senses. You know, they are all ignorant. I mean, the U.S. State Department knows way more than everybody, probably, about the Israel-Palestine issue. In 1944, it said that the Zionist movement was based on blood and soil, and it compared it to the Nazis. The State Department has always well, not always, but they have files. They know what has gone on over in Palestine. They know what the goals of the Zionists have been. And yet the secretaries of state, Tony Blinken, the despicable Tony Blinken, who had access to all these files, instead goes to Israel after October 7th and doesn't say, I come as a U.S. Secretary of State. He says, I come as one of you. I come as a Jew. Okay? So he came for the purpose of not saying to Israel, look, it's time to make peace. The reason Hamas did this is because of generations of brutality and repression that your country has forced upon the Palestinian people. It's time to make peace so that the killing can stop, the killing of Jews also. But he didn't do that. He said, we'll give you anything you want. You can kill everybody. I heard Tony Blinken talk about how when I look into the eyes of Palestinian children, I see my own children. And the next day, he granted Israel billions of dollars of weapons without congressional approval so they could kill those children. I wonder how Tony Blinken would feel if his kids had to have a limb amputated without anesthesia. And then you get little Marco Rubio. I mean, it's the same thing. Rubio knows nothing about the situation at all, nothing. And yet he continues talking about how Israel's defending itself. They're defending a nation led by Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich, three of the most genocidal bigots in the history of the world. That's what they are defending. If they don't know anything else, they should at least know that.
Yeah, that's true. But when you start suppressing freedom of expression and academic freedom, I mean, things don't really look that good. I'm not sure what how a change would come. But I mean, and there's no will from any American politician to go against Israel as well. I mean, they're very happy to put Israel over America, which is what I've seen from the outside, which is what many people see from the outside. And it's really strange that politicians in America don't really care about America that much, but they care a lot more about Israel.
Right, their loyalty is to Israel.
Yeah, Israel has, I think, subsidized education and health. America doesn't really have that. So,
no,
I mean...
No. I would, Ali, I would say Chris Van Hollen and Bernie Sanders have been critical of Israel. And then what was it? 19 Democratic senators voted to block sending military aid to Israel. So, 19 out of 100.
Yeah.
I don't know how many in the House would go along with that. Probably less than 50.
Yeah.
So it's, as I tell people, the U.S. Congress is Israeli occupied territory. Most of these Congress people in the Senate and the House, their loyalty is to Israel. In my opinion, they're all a bunch of traitors.
Yeah, I don't really understand.
Severe, but if they're
yeah, how does that work in America? So you've got dual citizenship over there, but people are openly saying that they prioritize, like Ted Cruz was saying, he prioritizes Israel over America. He was implying that, and I've seen other Americans saying that if USA is in trouble, we can all move to Israel. Israel will be a better place for us. So that's just...
These people, first of all, they get a lot of money from AIPAC, and with money comes influence. And the influence includes AIPAC telling them what the story is, because they're too lazy to study the issue themselves. Now, normally, if someone came up to a congressman and said, well, here's the history. If they weren't paid off, the congressman might do a little research on his own or have one of his aides do some research. Is this true? Is this really happening? But no, they get all this money from AIPAC, so it's very convenient for them to believe the AIPAC story. And Ali, I get AIPAC's newsletters almost every day. They are insane. Today, Israel delivered 2 million meals to the people of Gaza, stuff like that. I mean, they're blatant liars. They lie to themselves, and then they lie to everybody else. They lie to themselves that they're humane and peaceful and care about peace and are not bigots. And then after telling themselves that story, they tell the same story to anyone who will listen to them. And it's all a bunch of lies. They are deluded. And the reason they're deluded is because they are not protecting Israel. They're protecting their self-imagery, their ego identities, up to which Israel is fused. That's all. But the Israel they see does not exist and has never existed. It is a figment of their imagination that they project onto the real Israel that is extremely imperfect, to be very euphemistic about it.
Yeah. Let's see what happens. I mean, like I mentioned, Isaac Herzog is planning to come to Australia in February. I'm sure there will be demonstrations against that, but they're banning protests.
And he's a moderate.
Yeah, but
remember, he's a moderate from within in the context of Israeli politics.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, let's see what happens. I guess we'll catch up again next time, probably in a couple of weeks or months' time, and let's see if there's any improvement or not. But yeah, is there any last thing you want to say, you want to add before we wrap this up?
I guess I just want to finish, to anyone who's still watching, that the root of suffering is the attachment to a presumed limited and mortal identity and to the beliefs and images that emanate from and reinforce that presumption. We are all connected. The illusion of identity causes us to believe that we're separate, and that we are separate, and that us is only fits within a certain boundary that is similar in culture, religion, society, and them is everything outside that boundary, and them can be a threat, a mortal threat. And ideas are mortal threats. Again, if you see yourself as fair and humane, and you support Israel, then you are compelled unconsciously to see Israel as fair and humane. So criticism of Israel is taken as a lethal threat to your identity. It's like facing death, even though it's just words, okay? And this is why people who support Israel are so incredibly vicious towards anyone who supports the Palestinian cause, okay? Far more. I have not seen anywhere near the level of anger amongst Palestinians who've had hundreds of family members murdered, as I see from supporters of Israel who have had nobody murdered, but just want to be right. They want to be right. That's what's important. That's more important than peace. They got to be right. So that's how I want to. I guess that's how I want to end this.
My last question: Do you see?
It's like a spiritual problem.
Do you see public opinion shifting in America when you talk to people?
Among the younger crowd, yes, it is, but it's still not enough. And as I said, with Israel embarking on this public relations campaign, spending millions of dollars, and backed by all these billionaires, they're going to be changing public opinion in subtle ways and not so subtle ways. You know, there's all these organizations that are, as you mentioned earlier, are getting Palestinians kicked out of their teaching positions, are making sure schools don't teach certain things about the Israel-Palestine issue. You know, they're doing everything they can to make sure the public is as ignorant as possible so they can get away with their crimes.
Right. Thanks very much, Richard. Really appreciate you talking to me.
Thank you, Ali.
I'll stop recording now.